what? Anyone? Yeah, okay, perfect. We'll figure it out as we go. So, who is going to grab the go bag?
What's a go bag?
It is a bag we do not have that is filled with things we really, really need in an emergency.
Guess we won't have to worry about it then.
Ah, good point. So, we all know who to call if something happens then, right?
I'd have to call Jill, Devin, Melissa, Karen, and Bruce.
And I will try to call all of you, but Greg doesn't have a cell phone. Dad's phone will have a dead battery.
No doubt.
And Julie will be on the phone with Jill, Devin, Melissa, Karen, and Bruce.
Well, this is great. I am so glad that we don't have a plan.
I know.
Winging it is not an emergency plan. Make sure your kids know what to do during an emergency, who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information. A public service announcement brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Talk 1470 is WWNN Pompano Beach and 95.3 FM W237BD Boca Raton, the Health and Wealth Radio Network.
Want to lower your rate and payments, get rid of mortgage insurance, or get cash out? Find out about your best refinance options by tuning into the Get Mortgage Fit radio show with Alex Michaels and Carrie Kasem, Monday mornings from 10 to 11, where you'll learn everything you need to know about mortgage loans, today's rates, FHA, VA, and more. Call the Get Mortgage Fit show Monday mornings from 10 to 11 on WNN at 800-827-RATE, 800-827-RATE, or visit them online at newamericanfunding.com, NMLS 6606. What is the Del Walmsley Radio Show?
Welcome to the Del Walmsley Radio Show, where the hype ends and the help begins. I'm your host, Del Walmsley, and as always, we're working on your financial freedom.
Listen to the Del Walmsley Radio Show, Mondays at 5, Tuesday through Friday at noon on WNN.
Talk health, talk wealth, talk politics, talk 1470 and 95.3 FM WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm Marcia Teele, your host, and we're happy that you could join us today. We are live from the radio station WNN in Boca Raton, Florida. I'm glad that you are here, whether you're listening on WNN 1470 AM or 95.3 FM along the east coast of Florida, or if you've joined us live stream at caregiversolutions.info. I'm glad that you're here. We have an awesome show for you today. This show is for caregivers that take care of people that can't care for themselves. And it's also for professionals that want to learn more about caregiving, especially when it comes to dementia, like Alzheimer's disease. So we have lots of great tips, advice, people on the show that are experts in their field, not just lawyers and doctors and social workers, but sometimes actual caregivers, because who better to learn from than those who have walked in your shoes? So sit back and relax, because today we're going to be talking about a topic that has become very popular recently in the last couple years due to a television show that has the same name. And if you're wondering what that is, the topic is hoarding. Now, there's a television show about that, and it was very popular, and I'm not sure why, because people are very intrigued with this. And we're going to be talking to someone who has hands-on experience in the field for many, many years with this topic, helping people. And you'll want to kind of carefully listen, because you might be surprised of who might be a hoarder, or someone that you know might be exhibiting signs or symptoms of being a hoarder. And we're also going to talk about how to help them. So this is going to be a really great show, and I'm going to get started because my guest is here with me in the studio. Her name is Ann Meyerson, PhD, and she's with us. Hi, Dr. Meyerson.
Dr. Ann.
All right, Dr. Ann, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, thank you.
Really happy to have you here to talk about this particular topic. It's something that a lot of people don't talk about because it's a secret. And much like the A word of Alzheimer's, people in the years past didn't talk a lot about it because they wanted to keep it secret. It was shameful. But now a lot of people are out there with it, talking. There's a lot of support for Alzheimer's, research. There's a lot out there for caregivers and for people that are suffering from Alzheimer's and other dementia. So hoarding is almost like the other secret. And we're going to expose that today and talk about what that means, what actually it is, and how we can help people. So I want to start by letting everybody know that how qualified you are to be here today to talk about this.
I have seen hoarding.
You have seen it firsthand, like I said, which I can't wait to hear some of your stories because I know you do have some. But Dr. Ann, she has a PhD, and she is what they call a transition counselor and also a realtor. And she's been doing this for over 35 years here in the South Florida area and some up north too.
Connecticut.
Right, sometimes in Connecticut. You're also what we call a senior transition specialist, and you have a designation, and it's SRES. What does that stand for?
Senior Real Estate Specialist, where you are particularly trained to work with older people and what their needs are when they're moving.
So why is there a special designation for seniors when it comes to moving? Why is that necessary?
I think because what it involves are areas that realtors may not get involved in on a day-to-day basis. For example, transitioning to independent or assisted living, transitioning out of state to be with family, and it's a little different than being all excited about buying a new house. It's more like, oh, is this going to be my last move?
So a lot of issues for seniors in the golden years that would be more impactful to them.
Very stressful.
Yes,
very stressful time and frightening, because what's the next step?
Okay. So you have designation in this particular field, training for it. You also have degrees, and your master's is in counseling from the University of Maryland, and your PhD is in educational leadership from Georgia State University.
That's right.
So I find this very interesting how you have join together your degrees with being in real estate. When you went to school and you received your master's in counseling and your doctorate in education leadership, was being a realtor on your radar at that time, or how did that evolve?
It's an interesting question. I think what happened was real estate was not on my short plan, but as I was involved in the counseling process, I realized that I needed a little more action than sitting one-on-one and counseling. And it was a natural fit as I began working. I realized that I wanted to be out there and moving around. And certainly as a transition counselor and a realtor, you get to do that.
So it's the best of both worlds for you.
Well, it is, because it incorporates business and it incorporates real estate, and most important, it incorporates helping people. And that's really important at this stage of my life.
Yeah, I know a lot of people just love their real estate agents because they help them, find the perfect place. But how much more could someone love their real estate agent who could understand the emotions that they're going through, and not just the fact that they found a pretty place to live, but all the emotions that go along with making these changes.
Yes, and you brought up a very good point, which a lot of the time in my senior transitions, I deal with the adult kids, the caregivers.
Yes.
And what does it mean to pack up mom's house or dad's house, the memories that you're packing up, and where are they going?
Yes. So there's a lot to talk about today, and I'm very excited that you're here.
I think you just want to hear my funny stories, Marcia.
I do want to hear your funny stories. I'm looking forward to it, and later we even have pictures that we're going to put up on screen. So let's get back to this topic of hoarding. Now, according to the Mayo Clinic, I did a little bit of research. The Mayo Clinic describes hoarding as a disorder that is persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions because of a perceived need to save them. And that's their definition. And they go on to say that this idea of hoarding can be mild to severe and everything in between, which can be a little scary because we're going to talk about, people that might be hoarding but don't think they're hoarding, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it also says that it grows over time, and that especially people that are older are more vulnerable. And as a person gets older, they start acquiring things for no reason. They don't need them, and they have no space. So this is where it becomes really a problem because things pile up.
But to the hoarder themselves, they believe these are needed.
Yes.
They believe they're necessary. And I've seen some collections of things that amaze me that people think they need these.
Well, speaking of that, let's talk about some of the things that people hoard.
Some of the things that people hoard.
I mean, I know people, I have people in my life, some friends, that after researching this topic and knowing them intimately, I would classify them as being a hoarder.
Well, there's a funny story about if you are wealthy, you are called a collector. If you are poor, then you are a hoarder. And there's a cute cartoon that shows this, and that gets back to the issue you were talking about, perception.
Yes.
Walking into a penthouse apartment that had an entire bedroom dedicated to Beanie Babies.
Is that a collection or is it hoarding?
The other realtor showing the condo said it was a collection. I looked around and it sure looked like hoarding to me.
Well, again, according to the Mayo Clinic website, they say there's a difference between collecting and hoarding, and this is how they describe it. They said with collecting, usually a collector looks for specific things. So in other words, they have a collection of coins or a collection of something, and they just don't go out and buy every one they see.
There are random hoarders also, though.
Mm-hmm.
They're different. I have discovered different people hoard different things in different categories, and in their mind there is a reason for this.
Yes, in their mind, key phrase.
In their mind.
So collections usually are specific. They usually categorize things. So if you're a collector, they put them in categories, and they're very specific. They are carefully displayed. So these things that are special and collector's items, quote unquote, are usually carefully displayed and not cluttered. But that's as far as they go with distinguishing between a collection and hoarding. So, I guess it's up for interpretation.
Well, I think the main issue is, does it interfere with the hoarder's collector's life?
There you go. I think that's key right there. That's a very good, astute observation.
I walked into a family room in a very nice house once up in Connecticut, and it was wall-to-wall babies' toys. Now, is that a hoarder or a collector?
Babies' toys as in infants' toys?
Children's toys.
Children's toys. Well, there are people that collect old toys because they're not around anymore. And why are they collecting them? It's nostalgic. Maybe they think they can sell them in the future to get some money because they're rare.
I find that when I come to a circumstance like that, because putting the house on the market with all these toys would be a little overwhelming, I don't approach it that way. You know, they show me the toys and I go something funny like, oh boy, that's a lot of toys. She goes, yes, my children like them. Well, there were enough toys there that you would have had to have 12 kids to like all of them. And we slowly talked about clearing it out before it went on the market. So as the collecting, hoarding, I was able to work with her about it. So it was not the sense that I thought I had to bring a shrink in.
Okay, and some cases that is required. So there's so much to talk about. I'm so excited about this topic because you've seen a lot, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to take our first commercial break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back with Dr. Ann.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's.
Call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Hi, welcome back. My special guest today is Dr. Ann Meyerson. She is a senior real estate specialist, and she has a degree in counseling and in educational leadership with her PhD, and we're talking about hoarding today. And this is a subject that a lot of people have a lot of interest in. TV shows are even cropping up showing people's hoarding experiences, and it's a very emotional issue. So we're talking about seniors, some of the things that seniors go through, some of the things that caregivers, maybe adult children that are caring for their loved ones, or that adult children need to care for their parents. Maybe they're far away and they come into town because something's happened and they need to step in, and they're stepping into a situation where they can't even get in the house or get into a room. So these are things that we're talking about, not only to educate people about what is the cause and why people do this, but also how to help them. So Dr. Ann, thank you again for being here. This hoarding issue is very prevalent, more than I think people realize. I read that approximately 2 to 5% of the U.S. population are hoarders, but I'm not sure how accurate that could be because, number one, people aren't going to advertise that they hoard.
And not that many of them get treatment for it, so it would not be represented anywhere in the statistics. I think it's much higher than that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you, just for the fact that I personally know people that I think are either borderline or full-fledged hoarders, which I'm sure they would not agree with that, but we're going to talk about what makes a hoarder. So hoarding things that have no real value except in the hoarder's mind, where they think that they need it, and they want it, and they can't part without it. But ultimately, as you mentioned earlier, it affects the quality of life of that person. And that's when it becomes a problem. And the caregivers, absolutely. So that becomes a problem. So some of the things, I know you've said about 20 years ago you experienced your first...
my first hoarding
experience. But what are some of the things in general that are common that people hoard, except for magazines, newspapers? I think those are pretty common. I've seen people have them stacked up in their house. What other kinds of things do people hoard? Have you seen?
Well, there are food hoarders, because I've been in houses that have just rows and rows of food in the closets. Most of it is expired.
I was just going to ask you, what's wrong with having a lot of food in the pantry?
Well, if it's 10 years old, it's not the best thing to have, or they keep the wine so long that it is all turned to vinegar. Hoarding clothes, of course, is a very common one. I had a gal, if you don't mind me interjecting a cute story.
Yes, please.
I was speaking to a group, and she stood up in front of maybe close to 100 people and was talking about giving all her clothes, because she realized she had a problem with it, to Goodwill. And she donated them to Goodwill. And then she had a panic attack. And she went back, and she actually bought the clothes back from Goodwill.
She bought her own clothes back.
And she's looking at the audience, and they're all kind of like aghast about it. And she was so cute. She looked at them, and she went, "But don't worry, you can shop again."
Wow. Wow. But people do hoard clothes because they hang on to them. They don't fit anymore.
Some of them they never try on. You look at a closet full of outfits, and they've still got the price tags on them. They've never been tried on. I have another client who shops on the phone and on the internet. And then at the door in the morning, there will be 10 packages have arrived. She can't even remember what she bought, but there they are. Now, is that hoarding? Compulsive shopping?
Yeah, sounds like fun to me. Some of the other things that people hoard are broken appliances or broken gizmos that they think, oh, well, I'm going to fix it one day, but it's been years laying around that have been broken and in pieces or need a part, and they've never really gotten around to fixing it or replacing it, but they don't want to get rid of it.
Or what about, and I'm interjecting with some stories if I may, what about the gentleman who, remember the old cash registers and how you had the tape in them?
Yes.
He was saving those. He had boxes and boxes in his study.
Saving the tape or saving the machines?
Saving the tapes.
Of the numbers?
Of the numbers, in case they ran out and he couldn't get any more. So he had all these tapes. The machines were obsolete at this point, but he had all these tapes saved.
I guess he could cut it up and use it for streamers or confetti.
Well, he was saving it for a rainy day or an emergency, I think.
And then, of course, there's junk mail. People actually cannot let go of junk mail.
And old bills.
And bills, old bills that have been paid.
And tax records don't have to be kept from the beginning of time. You know, it's a 7-year look back.
Yeah.
And
so you've supplied us with a couple examples, some pictures that we're going to put up on the screen, and I'm going to have you explain what we're looking at for those people that are listening to us by radio. But if you are watching us live stream, if you look on your screen, you can see a sample here. So, Dr. Ann, what does this picture look like? What's in it?
In my definition, it looks like random hoarding. I think the gal at one point had been a dressmaker, so she kept that model up there, and she had all her collection of things around her that she perceived that she needed.
It just looks like a total disaster. It looks like Hurricane Irma came in there and just, threw everything around in a pile that is not neat. Everything is scattered.
It's random.
It's random.
This is what I call, when I see this somewhere, I call this random hoarding. And it's tough to get it cleaned up because there's so much chaos going on.
Yeah, there's no order to that. Absolutely. That things aren't together, things that match aren't together. It's just piles and piles. Okay, let's look at another picture and see what we have. What is this?
Okay, this is bottles and bottles and bottles on a wall, for those of you who can't see it. And as Marcia said, is this collecting or is this hoarding?
What are the bottles? What do the bottles contain?
Nothing. I believe they're old beer cans.
Oh, so this is a beer can collection, maybe?
Beer can collection / hoarding beer cans.
Wow. I mean, literally, it is all over the wall, from top of the ceiling to the bottom of the floor, filled with tiny little shelves and no inches in between.
And imagine trying to move someone who has this quote-unquote collection and wants to take it with them.
Well, of course, if they've taken a long time to collect this. I mean, it's their pride and joy, Dr. Ann. How could they give that up? Okay, let's go to the next one.
Hoarding with a purpose.
Well, we've got another picture here. Let's see what it has to show. See if it comes up. Maybe, maybe not. There is one that we have with a lot of animals in the...
Well, that happens to be everybody's favorite. It's called animal hoarding. And it's
there we go, right there. It's on the screen.
Yeah.
What do we see?
We see tons of cats.
There are cats literally on the furniture, on top of cupboards, looks like one's on top of a computer screen.
They're in charge. Those cats are large and in charge in that picture. There were several cats. The first time I ever saw hoarding in my life was bird hoarding.
And the person had a lot of birds in their home?
They had birds in cages all over their home. And unfortunately, what often happens with hoarding, the cages had not been cleaned. And so I was overwhelmed by the ammonia smell, the chaos. I feared for the old woman who was involved in this, and it was a form of animal hoarding. Her husband had been placed in a hospital and was no longer living with her, and this had become her reason, her raison d'etre were these birds. And of course, not to mention from a humane perspective, it wasn't particularly good for all these birds either.
Especially, they're being neglected. And cats, I mean, you need an awful lot of litter boxes to take care of cats like that. And I knew a lady, or through someone at work, I didn't really know her, but I knew her daughter, who found a kitten, and gave it to my son. And I said, well, why doesn't your mom keep the kitten? Because I know that your mom loves animals and loves cats. And she said to me, oh, well, she can't. She already has 15.
I'll top that one.
Yes.
I'll top that one. If I knew a client, actually the daughter told me about this, after the husband passed away and the kids moved out of town, the adult kids, she started gathering cats. And the family became very upset about it because she had 62 cats in and around her house out in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, the family managed to talk her into getting it down to 15 cats.
Wow.
So
that's crazy. So that's why they have these little signs. You go to like a little novelty store and it'll say, crazy cat lady.
I have that.
You have that? Okay.
That's so funny. I have that. I think
Well, in this case, you would have to be a little crazy to have 62 cats. Let's see if we have another picture. There we go. That's our last one. What do we see here?
We see a caregiver giving up. Total despair here. What do I do in a situation like this? And where do I start? And how do I get through it? And this is when I go into my mantra, bring the professionals in to help you. You cannot take care of this problem by your own. And as a caregiver, please, let's talk. We're going to talk about how you get the appropriate help.
Yes.
That's just showing you the frustration that someone would feel.
She looks like she's in a garage, just, overwhelmed, looking at this mess, like you said, and where do I begin? And it's just a hodgepodge of stuff, and it is overwhelming. And being a caregiver is overwhelming in the first place. And in order to have to add something like this on top of it, it's crazy. It's insane. So, so we just wanted to show those examples, and thank you for those pictures. You know, a friend of mine has newspapers, magazines piled up, but she's going to read them one day, you know? She also has other things that she has piled up. So much so, well, I don't go to her house anymore, but so much so that she can't have anybody in to visit her.
Right, and that's when the isolation really becomes an important issue that the hoarding promotes, because you don't want people around, you don't want them to see what's going on in the house, and
it's your little dirty secret, you know, that they have. And she wants to have friends, and she wants to start dating, and she said, what can I do? I could never bring a guy back here, you know, he would just turn around and walk out the door. And so, but it's more that she's just not collecting. She has a problem. And
well, it is hoarding, because it's definitely interfering with her life. And that is the true definition of hoarding, when it begins to interfere with what's going on in your life.
And it is interfering with hers. So when we come back after our next commercial break, we're going to talk about the mental conditions, if you will, that can precipitate people hoarding, or some of the personality traits that people have that might indicate they could be on the verge of creating chaos in their life.
And I think some of them are going to surprise you a little bit too.
I think so
tune
too.
back in.
Yeah. So we'll be right back.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs
.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'd like to take this opportunity now to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts has about 50 memory care communities all across the United States. They have 10 right here in the state of Florida. Arden Courts cares about not only the person with the memory loss, but also about the family and the caregiver. And as such, they offer a lot of resources. One of them is this book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It's a book written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mace. It's a wonderful resource for people that need to know more about dementias, different kinds of dementia, that need to know about caregiving basics and beyond, about some of the signs and symptoms, and about how to deal with some of the behaviors. If you're a caregiver or know one and would like to have this book, it is absolutely free. All you have to do is call Arden Courts on their toll-free line, which is 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410. Let them know that you heard about the offer for the free 36-hour day book on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and they'll be glad to get your name and number and make sure that they mail a copy right to you. So my guest today is Dr. Ann Meyerson. She is a senior real estate specialist. She helps people transition from one environment to another, like from home to independent to assisted living. And in her 35-year-plus career, she has encountered a lot of examples and experienced hoarding. And that's our topic today. We're talking about hoarding, what it is, how it affects people, how bad it can be for someone, and what to do about it. So thank you again for being here. This is such an interesting topic, but we're talking about people that have a propensity to hold on to things that other people would say it's trash or you don't need it, but there's reasons that they hang on. So let's talk about some of the reasons people hang on to stuff.
And there are various reasons why people hold on to things, and it hits at various times of life, too. I think the youngest hoarder that I knew was a gal in her 40s. You want to hear a story? Or
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I had a client who was a stunning ballerina, and I met her when her lawyer called me. The mother had passed away, and she wanted to sell the house and move on. So I went into the house, and the gal had danced with a professional ballet company. She had been a ballerina and had moved back in with her mother as she got older and her mother needed some help. I walked through the house, which was messy, and there had been a death, so I understand. And then I walked into a room that was filled to the top with designer shoes. They were not in boxes. They were in a pile up to the ceiling of shoes, all scattered all over the place. And she
like a mountain.
A mountain of shoes, yes. And they weren't matched. They were just in a big pile. She came into the room after me, and I said, boy, this is a lot of shoes. I always try to inject a little humor into it. She said to me, oh, I just love shoes. I can't get enough of them.
Obviously.
The story is, in the punchline, which is kind of a setback psychologically, is I was talking about this with a nurse at one of the senior livings, and she looked at me and she said, my daughter is a dancer, and the thing that upset her the most is now that she's 18, she can't wear designer shoes anymore. She can't wear high heels because her feet have been conditioned to the ballet dancing, and she's not able to wear these shoes. And it just hit me. And that was the psychological thing that was going on in this ballerina's mind, this retired ballerina. She was saving the shoes that she could not wear, would never be able to wear, but they meant something to her, and I'm not quite sure what it represented, but she was keeping and hoarding those shoes.
Maybe a loss. You know, she was maybe trying to fulfill a loss. I'm not a psychologist, but, you know, something was missing in her. I know some people keep things that they don't need because one day they might. And, you know, I mean, how many times I've done it before, you know, well, I don't need this, but as soon as I decide to throw something out, I am not kidding you, within the week, I needed that. And I think
that doesn't qualify you as a hoarder.
But it happens all the time. So, you know, you hang on to things, or some people hang on to things because in an extreme, you know, situation, because they might need them. And if they don't have them, they'll have to go out and spend money and buy them. So I'm just trying to maybe get inside somebody's head.
I think it's more the perceived value, that they do have a value to that particular person. And that's what it's about. And so you have to find ways in helping them to get beyond that need.
What about the person who maybe grew up in the Depression era and everything was scarce and they had to do with what they had and they had to scrounge for different things? And now as they're older, even though they have money, they're holding on to things that certainly they don't need, or certainly they could afford to buy if they got rid of it, but because they don't want to waste anything, because they were conditioned to save everything and not waste, do you think, you know, I mean, who knows? That might be another reason, because they were conditioned not to throw anything away.
Well, it's a sense of loss. It can be a sense of loss. And when you hoard something and you keep it, you perceive, and I think this runs through all of this, you perceive that you have a power there. It is in your control, that you have collected all these things and it's your possession. You are in control of this, and it's a sense of control.
Okay, so that's where it's stemming from control or fear, maybe of not having something, maybe trying to relieve some kind of a fear. But people have certain personality traits, right, that kind of tip them over the edge. So let's talk a little bit about that. One of them I know is anxiety.
Anxiety, and there's a lot of anxiety involved, and the hoarding can actually relieve the anxiety until it becomes so overwhelming that becomes an anxiety too, if that makes sense. And it's also a sense of isolation. When you feel that you're alone, and again, you want to belong, you want to be involved, a lot of elderly people, as they find themselves alone as they are aging, their hoarding gets worse. And
because they're trying to find purpose or feel, like you say, in control of their life, and maybe they're not in control anymore, but it's a false sense of control.
Right, and I think one thing we have to remember is that hoarding is not always alone. You can have depression, hoarding, you can have multiple symptoms. So a diagnosis of just hoarding can be a little tough. You have to understand who the person is, right, and what's happening.
And understand that underlying emotional state that's causing them to behave in this way. That's
right. The hoarding is really a symptom.
Yes.
It's a symptom.
What about people that can't make a decision? Hoarding can be like, well, you need to get rid of it, but, someone might say, I can't decide what to get rid of. I know, again, people that you go into a restaurant.
I think you know a lot of people that better call me, Marcia.
This same friend, okay?
Yeah, so I thought so.
Same friend. She goes into a restaurant and she literally cannot decide what to order, and takes her forever to pore over the menu, asking the waiter, what's good, what do you think, what do you recommend? And then when it's all said and done, she'll just order something completely different. So she's the one that's collecting the newspapers and the magazines. But I read that indecisiveness is a personality trait that can cause people to have these hoarding tendencies.
Yes, and you can identify hoarding tendencies. I can walk into a situation and I can say to myself, boy, we better get this client transferred or moved to a safer place to be, because I see the hoarding coming on stronger and stronger. And so that's what can happen.
If you're aware of certain things, you can identify. What about obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD? I mean, that's another biggie.
Well, hoarding used to be, I'm recollecting, hoarding used to be considered a form of OCD behavior. Interestingly, in the latest editions of the DSM, what they have done is they have made it a psychological disorder of its own. And the reason for it is quite fascinating. When they've done research on people who have different disorders, those that are categorized as hoarding may have and do have different brain waves than those that are categorized with depression, etc. And that can have a great impact on what medication they are given, what kind of treatment they're given, and also, believe it or not, on the insurance, which allows now for hoarding to be seen as a psychological disorder and can be covered under insurance.
Wow, that's
good information.
Yeah, that shows how big a problem it is.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and growing. Wow. Depression, anxiety, perfectionism. That's another one that is a personality trait. Everything has to be the perfect. They can't, be have anything wrong.
I would call that more OCD.
OCD? Okay.
Than hoarding. I think.
And what about procrastinating? A lot of people have terribly overstuffed closets or overstuffed garages like we saw in the picture, and they're just like, well, I'll get to it. One day I will get to it. Now, is that an excuse to not address their hoarding, or is it just because they're too busy, they don't have the motivation, or they're lazy and they don't want to clean out their garage?
Well, I think hoarding, and when it just gets to that magnitude, it's overwhelming, completely overwhelming. And when we talk about strategies to help hoarding, the thing to remember is it can't be done in a day. It didn't take a day to collect this stuff, and it's not going to take a day to get it out of there. It's a process, and it has to be taken carefully, step by step.
That is true, and we're going to talk about some of the consequences that can happen when people hoard. First one I can think of is it's not safe.
No, it's definitely not safe.
People can fall. Things can fall on them.
Yes, and I have stories about that too.
You do? Tell me a story.
Well, I've been in homes where you cannot walk through the living room into the dining room or into one of the bedrooms. And some of the bedrooms are completely dysfunctional. And people will trip when they're going through these little mini paths to get to things. And I'm not even talking about the sanitary nature of it. And naturally, from a business perspective, you can't put a house on the market that looks like that. And nor should anyone live in a house that looks like that.
Most importantly.
Yeah,
absolutely. So it's a safety issue. You talked about unhealthy, which would mean sanitary, especially if you're a bird hoarder or an animal hoarder or something like that. Also, the complications of it we talked about before. It isolates people. People can become lonely because they're cut off from the socialization of their friends.
And it is the secret that you mentioned. A lot of times when I speak on hoarding to a population, people will sit and look very quietly through the presentation. They will come up to me afterwards in privacy and say, I'm thinking my husband is a hoarder. The garage is full of things. It's getting out into the yard now. What do I do? How do I help him?
Yeah, they say they don't want to talk about it in public.
It's a secret.
It's a secret. It's shameful. So risk factors going into this hoarding discussion. Personality, we talked about certain personality traits, that's a risk factor. Family history, if you grew up that way and your parents were hoarding, maybe it's a little bit of a learned behavior.
Well, they're thinking that there might be some genetic ties also, and that gets back to the discussion of brain waves and inheritance and what did you get from your family. But I do think there may be some genetic dispositions towards it. That's what the research is showing these days.
And another risk factor is a stressful life event. Someone died, you went through a divorce, or you lost all your possessions in a fire, which brings me to the other complication of being a hoarder is a fire hazard, obviously.
Right.
So we have personality traits that are associated with hoarding. We have risk factors associated with hoarding, and we have complications as a result of hoarding. When we come back with our last segment, Dr. Ann is going to discuss how to help people who hoard. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Do you need the advice of an elder law attorney? Perhaps you find it difficult or overwhelming getting to appointments. The solution is Heidi Friedman of Becker and Polyakov. She brings elder law to you by meeting with you in the comfort of your own surroundings. In practice since 1994, Ms. Friedman is a member.
Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand.
Info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Dr. Ann Meyerson. She is a senior real estate specialist. She is a transition counselor and realtor, and we're talking about hoarding, and it's been such an interesting topic, Dr. Ann. This is something that really needs to be talked about more so people can be educated on what exactly is hoarding, what causes it, so that we can try to help some people. Yeah. So how do we help people?
How do we help people? Well, the first thing I think we have to do is we have to understand them. And understand, as you said earlier, they are probably embarrassed. Mm-hmm. They don't know what to do, and they don't really want a lot of people to know about it, while at the same time they're clinging on to these possessions. I had one gal, lovely gal, and she called me in. I didn't think it was a hoarding situation. She called me in along with 2 other realtors to evaluate the house, and when I looked at it, I went, oh, this is one for Dr. Ann. And I went through the house with her, and she said to me, you know, just because I'm a hoarder, I'm not stupid.
So she acknowledged she was a hoarder.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. She was working, you know, but it was beginning to interfere with her life, and she was living with her brother and how that was. But she said, people tend to think I'm stupid because I'm a hoarder, and I'm not. So I think one thing we have to remember is you have to give the person involved the respect that they deserve. You know, you can't belittle them, you can't make them feel badly about what's going on, but at the same time, you have to work with them so they can make the changes that truly are necessary.
But what if they don't want to make a change?
Well, what happens is, and after you see this for a while, either they will make a change or eventually it will be made for them. And I do say this to people, you know, this is a situation we have to handle. And if you don't handle it, it will be handled, and the decision not to handle it is a decision.
So are you talking about something out of their control that's going to force them to get rid of their stuff?
Could be. Could be. One of the things that we had mentioned at the break was that I see a lot of times that people are taking far too many things with them when they make the transition to the next residence. For example, you cannot fit a 3-bedroom condo into a studio apartment. And that's when someone can become a hoarder when they weren't even expecting to become a hoarder, you know, and it does, especially with seniors, just like not all of them want to go into assisted living or independent living or memory care. The decision is made for them.
Right, whatever's best for them.
Whatever is best for them. And one warning that I will give, stepping off a little bit, you can't just go in and clean up somewhere where a hoarder is living and expect that to solve the problem. It will simply exacerbate the problem. They will then also feel a tremendous sense of loss, frustration, and confusion. So any help that we give them has to be done in an orderly fashion.
With their involvement, right?
If possible. If possible, yes.
I mean, yes. You might just want to go in there and while they're out of the house, just throw everything away. But if this is such a psychological...
Please, no. Anybody listening or
issue,
watching,
it's going to tip them over the edge.
A good cleaning crew is not the answer to hoarding. It's one of the players in correcting the problem, but you cannot clean up a hoarder's house. As my friend said, you can shop again because you haven't touched the underlying psychological needs that are involved.
So now, you know, talking about the psychological needs, you have to get professionals in to discuss those issues, and maybe medications involved,
yes.
Maybe talk therapies involved, right?
So medication, talk therapy. One of the things you have to do is know when it's time to bring the experts in to help. And I am a counselor. I can do short-term counseling, But if I believe that there are deep psychological issues involved, I have to make a referral to a psychiatrist or a psychologist who can go into long-term therapy with them.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to be a repeat.
Yes, it is going to be a repeat. And a few times I've seen that happen. You clean the place up, or the family says, we'll take care of the problem. I come back, and not only has the problem not been taken care of, Mom is worse than she was before.
Yeah, and especially, if someone's living alone and the adult children, like we talked about, come in and see this is happening. But in your case, where they've called you in to sell the residence, it's unsellable the way it is. So you really have a tough job ahead of you to try to clean it up, make it look good, stage the house. It's pretty
and there
tough job there.
There are special teams of cleaners that I use who specialize in working on hoarding properties.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes. And so I know when I see a hoarding situation, there are a couple different groups that I can call who will come in and work nicely with the people. There are also packers that help, and we go room to room. And one of the strategies, do you want me to talk about strategies?
Sure.
One of the strategies that I have found that is really effective is photography. I had a gentleman who had so many plaques on the walls that I couldn't clear it up to do my photographs. I couldn't put it on the market like that because it looked very, very cluttered and hoarding. I suggested to him, let's take these plaques, let's take a picture of each one of them, and then we can create a memory book for you where you, in fact, will have those plaques, but you cannot take all 70 plaques to the assisted living with you, but you can take your memory book with you. And that actually calmed him down, and he was quite pleased with that.
Well, that's a great idea, because then it's compact. He can look at it anytime he wants.
Exactly.
It's not going to clutter the place.
And he still felt that it had value, because here were all the plaques that he could show his friends.
Well, that's his life. I don't know what he did for a living, but apparently he was very much awarded for his deeds, and that was his life.
And it was understandable. He didn't want to throw them out, but they were overwhelming.
So that's a great idea. So take pictures, put them in an album, put the little album on a shelf, good to go.
That's right. That's right. And that is an effective, low-key strategy that can work in various situations.
So if someone finds themselves in a hoarding situation themselves, maybe we could recommend that they call someone to get help if they're not wanting to sell their house, because that's what you do. Do you help people that aren't trying to sell their house to talk about those as a counselor?
I do some talks in groups, in group sessions. I'm doing one later this week, and when I do them, I will bet you that at least 2/3 of my audience will be hoarders.
Wow. So tell everybody, Dr. Ann, if they would like more information or talk to you on one-to-one, how could they do that?
Well, there are lots of ways they could do it. They could look me up on Facebook, Ann Meyerson. They could go to my website, trustpowerrealty.com, the power of trust, which goes hand in hand with what I am doing. They could call me, 203-216-4072. They could email me, ann.meyerson1@gmail.com. Or they could hoard it if it flows all out into the street. Maybe somebody else will call me to help them.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It was an awesome topic, and you're awesome, and I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did too. Maybe you'll come back sometime and we'll talk more about this. I love your stories. For all of you, don't forget to call Art in Courts, get your free copy of the 36-hour day book. Call 888-478-2410 and ask for your free copy. In the meantime, give somebody a hug, because they need it and so do you. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.